Mark?
Thank you. So, do you want to push the controls to my screen?
They're your way, Mark.
I think I'm there. Good evening and welcome. This is the first in a series of webinars that focus on the 5 core tools. And what I'd like to say to this slide, it's obviously the title, and that this is an ASQ Automotive Division webinar. If you have questions and you're not able to stay around for after the fact and you want to ask those questions, you can contact me at this email address. And I also wanted to mention about our logo. Some people think that because my initials are M and M, that that's what those two M's stand for. I just want to clarify that the first M is my wife Mary, and that I know my place in life. About 2.5 years ago, I got involved as a advisory council member for the ASQ Learning Institute. And at that time, they set the objective to develop an instructor validation model. That model was completed, and I'm going to be talking about that this evening because part of the intent is that we use instructor validation to ensure that all of our instructors that would be teaching this course have gone through this process. Then I was doing another volunteer activity over at the World Conferences here in Pittsburgh. I was manning the booth with the two wonderful automobiles there, the Automotive Division's booth, and answering questions, and got to talking about the need for training to the 5 core tools. That ended up developing into a relationship. The first thing I did when I did that is to develop a course development process. And this is the process. What ends up being developed, there was to give you a bit more of the history behind the creation of this course, ASQ headquarters developed a relationship to provide training to one of their corporate clients. And the training was focused on the 5 core tools. Well, they naturally came to the Automotive Division to seek the subject matter experts that would teach these courses. What I found out is that there's a very specific set of needs with this corporate client, that they want things tailored to their own company, but then the ASQ Automotive Division also wants a generic version that isn't tailored to any specific company. The area that's tailored to a specific company is this first column, and there's a review process and a recreation process until we get through the launching. And then this is a process that involves the generic ASQ Automotive Division course notes. And there is the intent that we do an ASQ Automotive review of the course content. This evening begins that process. It's your feedback that may change or modify our approach, so that is open to you. This is the table of contents from the PPAP 4th edition, which is the current edition of the PPAP manual. And what I've done is presented, after an introduction, this is a course outline. The PPAP process requirements, that would be the requirements in Chapter 1, in the first half of Chapter 2, all of Chapter 3, 4, 5, and 6 go into the PPAP process requirements. There's an exercise that you'll get to experience in this webinar, and then we'll talk about the content-specific requirements, those 18 requirements that need to be reported out for every PPAP. And then we have a second exercise for you that I think you'll really enjoy. It's called Simple Words for the 18 Elements. So the introduction handles the agenda, the objectives, and effective implementation of PPAP. The process requirements review what's in the PPAP manual. In the first exercise, we're going to look at situations and strategies. Then we're back to the PPAP manual for the detailed requirements of those 18 elements. And then we'll work on the simple words for each of the 18 elements. The course goals are to provide a fundamental understanding of the evidence that's required to produce conforming requirements, to minimize the risk. And what that involves is understanding all of the customer's requirements and then making sure that the production processes are capable. That, after all, is the purpose of the production part approval process, or PPAP. So we have these 18 different documentation requirements. Understanding what the requirements are, and if there's any updates or changes to those requirements, you can think of each of these blocks as being a file folder that contains certain amount or certain types of information. So these can be electronic or they can be paper. The third of these blocks, if there's customer engineering approval required, that's where those documents would go. If you are design responsible, then you'd include a design FMEA, or a lot of companies will choose to keep that information confidential and in a file, and instead put a document in this chapter telling where those documents reside, but holding that information confidential and not letting it out of the bag, so to speak. Then we've got the process flow diagrams, the process FMEA, the control plans, any measurement systems analysis studies, the dimensional results, actual measurements, the materials and test results, the initial process studies, documentation for qualified laboratories, if there's Class A surfaces or appearance approval requirements, there's a place for those reports. If there are sample production parts, a place to note where they are and how they're being managed. The same with a master sample part. And then we have checking aids, customer-specific requirements, and finally a file folder that would hold the part submission warrant. Again, all of these things are done not just to make extra documentation on you, but to ensure that you're managing the risk to your company and to your customers. So the PPAP requirements. I can't teach an entire 8-hour class in a 1-hour webinar, so I've just taken a handful of the slides to talk to. This is the first of 2 slides that use bullet points to describe the changes going forward from the 3rd edition to the 4th edition of the PPAP manual. This is not in the PPAP manual, but the website that's identified in the PPAP manual 4th edition makes reference to this new and revised. So if you're looking for customer-specific instructions, you can find them at this website. They've moved the truck OEM requirements to Appendix H. The part submission warrant has been revised, and so on. So these are some of the changes that took place. The other page I didn't include. The purpose of the PPAP, twofold: demonstrate that the requirements, the design requirements, those specifications are fully and properly understood, and then secondly, that the manufacturing process has the potential, at least, to produce the product consistently meeting these requirements at the production rate. I sometimes refer to that as being a robust and capable process. A significant production run. This is a foundation of the FMEA, because what we're trying to do is to demonstrate that the production process is capable. It's intended, this production run, to test the manufacturing process at the cycle time, at running at rate. So the requirement is that at least 300 consecutive parts are a part of this significant production run, and they're run at the production site at the specified production rates using production tooling, production gauging, production processes and materials, and the production operators. What we're trying to do is to test the process. Is the process ready to go into production? Now, these terms, unless otherwise specified, there's a term used in the PPAP manual called a customer authorized representative. That's the individual who has the authority to otherwise specify. So if you're running an extremely low production rate part, 300 consecutive parts might not be practical. That would be the individual. But this is the standard for most operations. Otherwise, you negotiate with that customer authorized representative. There's also a note here that parts from each unique production process have to be measured and tested. We want to be sure if we have a four cavity mold, that parts from each of the four cavities are conforming, are consistent, that they're not different from each other. In Chapter 4, the requirements talk about submission levels, and there's 5 different submission levels. So that's often a topic of a PPAP course. Level 5. What Level 5 does that the other 4 levels don't do is they state that the supporting data is going to be reviewed at the organization's manufacturing facility. The implication there is that the customer is on site to watch the PPAP significant production run. Level 4 allows the customer to document specifically what requirements they want defined. Level 3 is the default. If not otherwise specified, the PPAP manual, 4th edition, says that Level 3 is the default, although there are some customers who have said, for this product, for this group, level 2 is our default, so that would be otherwise specifying. So the case of unless otherwise specified for the default. What we show here are the 5 levels that are in a chart against the 18 different documentation requirements, or those file folders. The R stands for the organization shall retain these documents. The S stands for the organization, that would be you, has to submit these documents to your customer. And the asterisk says that you have to keep those documents at appropriate locations and submit them to the customer upon request. Now, it seems to me that the 18 elements have to be done, and that it's only a matter of, it's not a matter of less work at level 1 or at level 2 or at level 3. The same amount of work has to be done. It's a matter of who's going to manage those documents. That's what these levels represent. Then we have 3 different part submission statuses. Obviously, approved would be the goal, but there might be some times when an interim approval might be necessary to give the organization enough time to do some root cause analysis and to resolve some nonconformities to get their process up to an approved level. And while interim approval is an option, it's absolutely not the target. The target is approved status. What approved status allows you to do is to ship the customer's product to the customer on their schedule. It gives you the authority that says, we're ready to do business. And that's how we get to invoice, is on things that actually get sold and shipped. Here we have a list of the appendices in the PPAP manual. So just the presentation of different types of information. If you're dealing with both materials, it's described in detail what you have to do in Appendix F. If you're working for the heavy truck manufacturers, those requirements are specified in Appendix H. So, I've done some talking up to this point. What I'm wondering is, am I still online?
Yep, Mark, you're broadcasting fine.
Okay. Well, I have a few questions for you. And you should be able to respond to these. Can you tell them how to respond to these, Walt?
Yep, I have a poll on the line for everybody. Mark, you can read them the question. I have the yes or no question everybody can answer.
So the question is, 400 consecutive parts are required in a significant production run. True or false?
Give everybody a couple seconds to answer. 75% of the people have voted already.
I don't see where the voting is taking place.
It's taking place in the background, Mark. As soon as we're done here, I'll share the results with
Oh, okay, okay.
83, 84%. Okay, I think we got a pretty good representation. 85% of the people have voted. And how do I share the results? Share. There we go.
So the answer was true. Let's see. The next question. You are to produce a high-risk part or assembly, and your customer authorized representative wanted to be present for the significant production run. What level PPAP would you expect to be specified?
Let me get that one up here, Mark. Okay.
The correct answer is level 5. What percentage got level 5?
They're still coming in, but
Okay.
let me stop them after they already got the right answer. 96% level 5, Mark. Let's close the
Woohoo!
And share the results here. So, good job to everyone.
Question 5 asks, if you were to produce a part and your customer wanted to specify exactly which elements of the PPAP were submitted to, what level PPAP would you expect to be specified?
Give them a couple seconds. We have 50% already voted. %60. All right. Well, we got 75% in already. Let's share the results there.
The correct answer here was level 4. That's the column with all of the asterisks, which allow the customer to specify exactly what parts of the PPAP they want submitted and to whom. This last question doesn't have a way for you to respond, but give this some thought. Under what conditions would it be appropriate to request an interim PPAP approval rather than just fixing the existing deficiencies and applying for a full PPAP approval? Have you ever had the opportunity to shut down an automobile assembly plant? It's an exciting experience, and not in the good sense of the word exciting. So the next thing I want to focus on are the PPAP content requirements. And again, obviously, I can't talk to all of these different items in great detail, but what I can do is put into simple words the intent of each of these elements, and then we'll take a look at one of the elements in a little bit more detail, and that'll be the initial process studies. So the design record, the intent of the design record in 3 simple words are that the requirements are understood. That's what we want to accomplish by reviewing the design record, by reviewing all of the requirements, and then if there are changes midstream, that those requirements are also understood and that they're managed before they're incorporated into the design record. If there are engineering changes that are made, they haven't yet been incorporated into the design record, this is the holding space, this second folder. The third folder is customer engineering approval. That's where documents that illustrate that your customer agrees with your engineering thoughts where it was required are held. The intent, in 3 simple words, of this element is that engineering meets requirements. That's what it's all about. When we look at the design FMEA, the intent is that the design risks are managed. When you look at process flow diagrams, this 5th file folder, if you will, that the process flow is defined. And when you look at the process FMEA, we're interested in knowing that the process risks are managed. Sorry, I've got a phone ringing in the background. I apologize for that. Someone just picked it up. The simple words for the control plan, that process controls are defined, that we understand what things that we have to control in the manufacturing process. And number 8, if we're going to have measurement processes defined in the control plan, those measurement processes ought to be capable. The focus of our MSA studies are to demonstrate that the measurements can be trusted. The 9th element, the dimensional results. This is where we try to demonstrate conformance to requirements, that the results of our process conform with the requirements. Item number 10, the material and performance test results are also used to document conformance to requirements. When we look at the initial process studies, the goal here is to demonstrate that the process is first stable and second capable, so that the process is both stable and capable. When we look at the 12th file folder, qualified laboratories documentation, the goal there is that our laboratories can be trusted, that we know what their scope is and that they're competent to accomplish that scope. That's why that file folder exists. If we have appearance items, then the appearance approval report simply provides evidence that the results conform to requirements. Sample production parts have to be identified, traceable, and maintained. Master sample parts have to be identified, traceable, and maintained. Checking aids have to be identified, traceable, and maintained. When we look at customer-specified requirements, we're back to the realm that we were in the first 2 boxes, that the requirements are fully understood. And when we get to the part submission warrant, this last of the 18 elements, this is documentation that the process is trustworthy. The focus of this PPAP process is the management of risk. It's risk reduction. So I want to take you into the initial process studies in a little bit bigger detail, and these are the set of slides that would be used to teach that part of the PPAP process. These are the 6 paragraphs that are listed to describe the initial process studies in greater detail. And what I do to kind of guide the instruction is I use some of the thoughts from one of my teachers, and I'm guessing one of your teachers for at least some of you. I would imagine that there are at least some people who remember very fondly Dr. Hans Bajaria. Well, here's my thought. The genius of Dr. Bajaria was really to synthesize the work of the other masters into this practical, effective structure to identify and resolve problems. And what he did was he asked 3 questions about any given process, but he took these 3 questions in order. It's these 3 questions that provide the logic that's used in accomplishing the initial process studies. The first question, is the process stable? When you're able to answer that correctly, as in saying yes, the second question kicks in. Is there too much variation? And when we can answer that question correctly, as in, no, there's not too much variation, then the third question, is the process off target? And what Dr. Bajaria argued was that these 3 questions could identify 3 different unique sets of causes. So as we go through this course material, we'll come back and answer these 3 questions or identify the tool that would answer these 3 questions. So there's variation in all things. That's what we're talking about when we're looking at the initial process studies of a PPAP. So we take some measured values, and we take a few more and a few more and a few more, and after we have a representative sample, then we can describe what's sometimes referred to as the natural variation inherent in the process. How much variation exists in this given process? And if we wanted to describe it, this natural variation inherent in the process, we might think of the causal factors, the people, the methods, the material, and so on, and we could even put that into a cause and effects diagram where the effect, the result, is this much variation. And these are the causal factors that could be detailed out. Well, what we want to know when we're looking at the initial process studies is, are there changes in behavior? Is there a change in location? Is there a change in dispersion, the width of the distribution, or is there a change in the shape of the distribution? That's what we're interested in knowing before we do any calculations of CP, CPK, those types of figures of merit, because if we don't have a stable process, Dr. Shewhart would say, we have absolutely no basis for predicting how the performance might be in the future. It was the genius of Dr. Shewhart who invented the tools that allowed us to take from a set of data and develop a rational basis in determining whether the data is random or whether it's affected by what he called assignable causes. He said some processes are predictable. We can predict over time how the process is going to behave in the future. We say it's in statistical control, that the process is stable, and we assess that control on a control chart. X bar and R is a typical type of control chart, but there are others. Other processes lack stability. We say that these have special causes that are present, what Dr. Shewhart called assignable causes. We say that process is unstable, it's out of control, and it provides no basis for prediction. we can use our control charts to watch whether the process is drifting off target or whether it's changing in dispersion and get signals from that. The first of the three questions that Hans Bajaria asked, is the process stable? The method to know the answer to that is a control chart. We would expect to see the control chart on the items that we're performing this initial process study on to be statistically stable, to be in control. No points beyond the control limits, no discernible patterns that would say that this is not natural. So on to the next question. Is there too much variation? Process potential is a statistic that takes a look at the ratio between the tolerance and that Six Sigma spread, the natural variation inherent in the process. It's simply that ratio. And what I've created here is a distribution that's centered on nominal, and it's 3 standard deviations either side of the mean. And then I took and made my specifications, because I like Six Sigma, 6 standard deviations plus the mean, and 6 standard deviations subtracted from the mean to set my specification limit. So whatever the value of a standard deviation in this graphical interpretation, it's 12 standard deviations, that's the tolerance, the maximum variation from the upper spec to the lower spec, divided by the 6 standard deviations. Well, 12 divided by 6 is 2. Well, if we have this process shift by a standard deviation, we still have 12 standard deviations between the upper spec and lower spec, and the process is still 6 standard deviations wide. 12 divided by 6, it's still 2, even though it's not centered. I could be all the way over touching one of the tolerance limits, and the value for CP, for process potential, is still 2, or I could be making non-conforming product, and the process potential is still 2. So the question is there too much variation? The method to know is the statistic CP or its counterpart PP, and I'll talk about the difference between those in just a few slides. That is how we know. If we don't have a CP value greater than 1.67, then we can't very well achieve a CPK value of greater than 1.67, even if we're right on target. We have to have a value greater than we're trying to accomplish for our value of CPK, which relates to Hans Bajaria's third question. Is the process off target? Well, process capability is going to do a different type of comparison. It's going to look at the worst case scenario. CPK is going to be the minimum of these two calculations, either the mean minus the lower spec limit or the upper spec limit minus the mean divided by 3 standard deviations. If I'm perfectly centered, if I'm right on nominal, then my value for CPK is going to be equal to my value for CP, a value of 2. But as I shift, as the process shifts by a standard deviation what we're doing is we're counting the number of spare standard deviations. And each standard deviation in a graphical interpretation has the value of 1/3. So from the mean to the spec limit, to the nearest spec limit, be the upper spec limit minus the mean, there are 5 standard deviations there, each worth 1/3. So we've got 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3, a CPK of 1.67. Here we have no standard deviations to spare, a CPK of 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, so a CPK of 1. Here we've shifted in the other direction, 1/3, 2/3. We're making some percentage of the population scrap. About 2% of the population will be scrapped with this, the way that this looks, 1/3, 2/3, 0.67 CPK. The difference between CP and CPK and PP and PPK is the way in which the standard deviation is specified. If we're using the values for CP and CPK, then we can pull R bar from our control chart because we have no business doing these calculations if we don't know that that first question has been answered, that we have a stable process. So R bar divided by a constant for the sample size, D2, will give us an estimate of the standard deviation. And for PP and PPK, it takes all of the data, each of the individual x's, and that difference from the mean. Well, if we added all of these values together, it'd give us 0. So instead, we square these values, sum them together, divide by n-1 for sample statistics, and then take the square root of all of that as our estimate of the standard deviation. This is how we calculate PP and PPK from this description of the standard deviation, and CP and CPK from this version of the standard deviation. So the question is the process off target? The statistic, the method to let us know, is CP and CPK. And if the value for CPK is quite a bit lower than CP, then we know that we're off target. The interesting thing that I've found while I've watched people try to launch product is they tend to want to shift the product to be on target as a first step rather than eliminating the noise in the system, identifying special cause variation and very systematically eliminating that special cause. I'm suggesting that Hans Bajaria's order is a more efficient way to get your processes robust and capable. The next topic that I'd like to introduce is instructor validation. This is a model that was developed by the ASQ Learning Institute, and I'm going to go online here real quick. This is how I would get to this information. Oh, that's not good. Oh, maybe it's because I'm already online. So I've got these. Here we go. What I do, this is a screenshot that I took earlier in the day, and what I do is I enter instructor validation onto the first where it allows me to search when I off the ASQ website, and that takes me to this slide, and then I can click on the instructor application form if you want to become an ASQ instructor. And then I wanted to show you the criteria checklist that we look at. So if you want to find things about the history and the rationale, there's other things that you can click on. And Rob Waters, the director of the Learning Institute, has actually created a webinar that you might want to review. But let's look at this instructor validation first. This is an online form. If you want to become an ASQ instructor, either for local section courses, for division courses, or for corporate courses that are offered through the ASQ Learning Institute, this is how you would provide information. So there's personal information up at the top. Then it asks you in a fairly open format, what about your education and training? Provide us background. And you can include additional sheets as you see fit. And then it'll ask you to describe your applied technical experience and provide information about your instructional experience. We've implemented this in the Ann Arbor section, and we're using ASQ validated instructors for our courses. This is what we fill out. It's between the chair, and I'm the education chair for the Ann Arbor section. And from that information and from viewing you in front of a class perhaps, we assess this criteria when we're looking at your education and training. When we're looking at your applied technical experience, this is what we look at, and there's places for us to add notes to give feedback. Your instructional experience. So that's the first page. The second page of this form looks at instructor attributes. And if you think you might be interested in teaching courses, this is what a consensus based on a pretty thorough review of the literature said. This is what we expect out of our instructor attributes, training delivery skills, facilitation dynamics. So you can get a pretty good idea of what you validated instructors. And then we summarize each of these areas with comments and provide this information as such over to ASQ reporters for their So it's about 2 minutes till 8, which is about where I plan to be. This second exercise is really 2 parts, and I'm only going to ask you to do the first of the 2 parts. What I have here is this graphic that you've seen of the 18 file folders. And I'm going to put this into notes page format. And the intent would be to have you identify, in a classroom, you'd actually put a, well gosh, design risks are managed. That ties in to design FMEA, so you'd put the letter A right here. And then you have some of these that are used 3 times. So to identify which of these sets of words go with the 18 elements. What I'd like you to do is take a stab at that on some other piece of paper, just write 1 through 18, and match those up with the letters A through L that describe these terms. And if you get it, in the analysis, I think there's a way for you to click on this and give a feedback. If you get it, click on green, and if you don't get it, if you end up just shutting down, click on red.
Yeah, Mark, I can't put a green and red on there, so I created a poll that says I'm finished or just show me the answers.
Oh, okay.
I think it was a little hard to see the top boxes, Mark, and most of the feedback we're giving are just show me the answers. So,
Well, in that case, there will be a file available for you to download, and it'll look just like this. Is that large enough to read?
yeah, that looks fine.
So this is the first of the elements, but I was trying to make this an interactive experience for you. Get this feeling of accomplishment. So, right now, the PPAP course has been written for a corporate client, and it's being written as a generic version with nothing that is client specific, just based on the 4th edition manual. And the intent is that with feedback from the automotive division, we strengthen this course, we make it better, we make it tighter, and then we develop with these course notes an instructor's manual that will allow us to have consistent instructor-to-instructor performance based on the notes in an instructor's guide. So that's my presentation, and I'll be happy to open it up to your questions.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks for the great presentation. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and answer them in the questions box in there, and I'll read them to Mark. We have some coming in already, Mark. Let's see. On the first question you asked, I think it's back on page 30. It says the answer is true, and I'm getting quite a few of these answers, but 90% of us said no. So you can, I don't know if you want to go back to page.
Hold on a second. Okay, the question was 400 consecutive parts are required for a significant production run, and the answer is false. That came from this slide on the significant production run that requires a minimum of 300 consecutive parts. If the question on page 30 would have said 300, then this would have been true.
Okay. Okay, next question. In the PPAP documentation requirements 2.2.13 appearance approval report, does it make reference to a cosmetic appearance, or what makes the reference?
Can you hold on just a second?
While we're waiting for Mark, there's quite a few questions coming in about whether these all these material Mark showed. They will be on our website. I'm actually on vacation right now, so it's going to give me a day or so to get these on our website on asq/auto.org. The recording will be on there, but that won't be on there till next week sometime because it's a 50 gigabyte file and it takes me a bit to get that uploaded. So slides will be up there in a day or so next week for the recorded webinar. And a couple questions coming in about the RU credit. An automatic email will be sent out 24 hours from now with the, it'll say thanks for attending, and at the end of it, it's going to say use this as your verification for your recertification credits. So please don't throw that away. Save that and send that in for your RU credit because I'm not able to regenerate that automatic response. So thanks.
So, in answer to the question about appearance approval reports, there's a note underneath the paragraph that it describes that says the appearance approval report typically applies only for parts with color, grain, or surface appearance requirements. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. We don't have really a way of without chaos opening that up, so we'll just call that good.
When I asked for that moment, it was to go grab my PPAP manual.
Okay. Another question here. What's the difference between 2.2.14 and 2.2.15? I know this is forcing you to thumb through some files.
Yep.
In other words, do we have document differences between them two numbers?
A master sample part is typically considered a golden part or a good part, a part of known values. Sample production parts can either be correct or incorrect, as in placed on a board so that I can see in a spot weld application, for example. We might have sample production parts that have an edge weld and have a cold nugget or some other type of specific defect. So those would be your sample production parts. The documentation requirements would be about the same because what we need to know is where they are, what they are, and how they're being maintained.
Okay, great. I think this was going back to one of our second poll questions. You said the asterisk identified items to be held for review. Level 2 with customer chosen items. Should the answer have not been level 2?
Can you tell me which, was that question 4 or question 5?
It doesn't say, so.
Okay, can you repeat the question then?
Yeah, you said the asterisks identified items to be held for review. Level 2 with customer chosen items. Should the answer not be level 2?
The answer should have been level 4.
Okay. Another question, where can we download the checklist? Again, that'll be on our automotive website, asq-auto.org. In addition to the automotive industry, what other industries use the PPAP as a standard customer requirement?
I know some of the heavy truck manufacturers do. I'm told that folks over at Toyota have their own process that differs slightly from this, but they do have a production approval process. It's just not specific to the PPAP. As we get outside of the automotive industry, I'm not certain. I know that the creators of healthcare devices work to a different standard. They incorporate a lot of these thought concepts, but they live outside of a PPAP world. The course that I offer through M&M Consulting is called Product Approval Process, because I do deal from time to time with non-automotive manufacturers, and the term PPAP is a very automotive-ish term.
Yep. And okay, great. There's many people asking and answering the questions in the chat as well about how many non-transportation industries use it, and chemical suppliers to aerospace, Pratt & Whitney as an example. So great. When should you use PPK instead of CPK?
The SPC manual and the PPAP manual suggest that PPK is appropriate for those cases where you have not demonstrated process stability. When you have some type of a special cause going on that either you can't, or you physically can't, or you, for financial reasons, choose not to address, then you should be using PPK instead of CPK to describe those processes. That's what's stated in the PPAP manual and the SPC manual. They're in concurrence on that.
Okay, great. A couple questions coming in. When do you anticipate doing the APQP session? I'll answer that one. We plan on doing that in January timeframe, probably mid-January, I'm guessing, right after the holidays. So stay tuned again on our website, asq/auto.org. Quite a few other questions about when the next dates are. November 30th and December 14th are our next two for SPC, and was it?
FMEA is on the 30th
Yep.
of November. SPC is on the 14th of December.
Yep. And the November 30th and the December 14th one, you can register on our website. Them links are already there, so please visit our website for that one. What is the acceptable criteria for an interim approval of PPAP? Maybe a little vague.
The criteria is that you have concurrence with your customer, that customer authorized representative, that you've identified a deficiency in the product, but you still need to ship the product. So you request an interim approval. They have to bless the root cause that you've identified and your strategy for bringing that issue to closure. The interim approval is intended to give you enough time to ship product while you're fixing the problem, while you're eliminating the source of the problem. And it requires customer concurrence.
Okay, great. Here is a great question. Is measurement correlation between the supply base and the customer usually an issue? And how do we quantify or quality the variation between the two? We have measurement correlation issues quite often and have little knowledge of how to handle them.
That's kind of interesting. In the MSA manual, they suggest that especially if you have, for example, an automated measurement process, like a CMM. So there's no manual intervention that would cause the difference to be used one operator to another operator. So we have no significant reproducibility error because of the nature of the machine, that we can use the concept of reproducibility to look at the measurement error from one measurement process, say at a supplier, and contrast it to the measurement error that's associated at another measurement process, for example, the customer, and that can be quantified as reproducibility error.
Okay, thanks. I'm still getting
My opinion is that when you look at problems of measurement processes giving you different results at different locations, it's usually, my experience, tied to lousy datum schemes.
Okay, great. Still getting quite a few questions about the webinars. Are you going to have another training for PPAP? That's currently not on the schedule, but we do welcome any comments or suggestions for new topics and or speakers. So please email us on that. And Chris Shaw had his contact information, and that'll again be on the website. One other question: will we get an automatic email with the next webinars? If you're an ASQ Automotive Division member, you will receive an email from us with the link and everything to register. If you're not, you're going to. First of all, I'd welcome you to join us, and second, you would have to monitor our website on asq-auto.org. Okay. Is the model you showed in the beginning a course development model?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And on a similar note, can you show the slide again on the instructor validation, page 3, and repeat how a summary of rating works?
Yep. Hold on. Okay. The criteria that we have, we're looking at 6 different competencies. One in education and training, one in the application or technical experience, instructional experience, and the criteria we decided on is either they meet the criteria or they don't. These come from the 2 earlier pages. So the training and education, what you'll do is you will document what education and training you've had. So list academic degrees, professional certifications, with the institutions and dates, other relevant credentials you'd like to have considered on this application. This information helps us evaluate what we think the criteria is for a given course, and whether you've met the criteria, or if you have a way to go. And there might be some notes here on what the expectations are. And so then we've got the applied technical skills and the instructional experience. Those are going to be based on the information you provide in this box and the information you provide in this box. If we go to the second page, looking at the instructor attributes, training delivery skills, and facilitation dynamics, here we want to have some evidence. Either somebody has actually watched you present and can say, yep, he's articulate, yep, he's flexible, and yes, and it's either met or it's not met. But these are things that we would expect out of a ASQ validated instructor. So those just filter down to this third page where we summarize and recommend for validation or not. So that's the method that we have, and they have in the description of the instructor validation process, one of those items that you can click on, they have a flow chart that will allow you, if this person has never instructed ever before in his life, then that doesn't disqualify them, but these instructor attributes can be used to teach them, and then we might want to see a video as some type of evidence that, yeah, they can work in front of a classroom and accomplish the objectives of that given course. Now, I will add that the Learning Institute, that advisory council right now, is split into two groups. I am working on a group that's trying to standardize how we evaluate course material. Right now, every section, every division seems to do their own evaluations a little bit differently. And here we are an organization of quality where we try to standardize things. So we're working to standardize the evaluation. Another team is concurrently working on a different topic, and that is, this is the instructor validation. There's course content validation is the other term that's working. How do you validate that a course content meets the expectations for those objectives for that class?
Okay, great. There's another question. Is there a fee for instructor validation?
No, there's not. And it is a wonderful thing to put on your resume that you're an ASQ validated instructor.
Great. Another question.
The only thing I'd like to, Mark, the only thing I'd like to add is you will have to be an ASQ member initially to start out with this process.
That's true.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, Kush.
The ASQ membership, ASQ is not going to certify outside as well. Is that true or not? You have to be an ASQ member or not?
We had quite a bit of discussion on that. In most cases, we're going to be looking for ASQ members as the ASQ validated instructors. But if there was an individual who Stu Hunter's name came up. If you were talking about teaching statistics and Stu Hunter's name came up, while I think he is a member, if he weren't, we probably would still want him to teach for us. So those kind of conversations came up. I don't know if it's explicitly defined, but we certainly want to prefer our members.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Next question. In the mail they're going to receive in 24 hours is a link going to be included for the download. It'll be a link to our website, and simply click on webinars and all the presentations will be there. Like I said, the presentation material should be there within a day. It's going to take me a few days, probably over Thanksgiving, to get the video uploaded. That's quite time consuming. This is more of a basic for the PPAP. Is there plans for advanced training? Also, will all future webinars be basic? I wouldn't like to have you on the last one we had with multiple environment stress testing. It was very technical. So we try to balance between the very techie and the very niche, topics to the kind of overviews, general overviews. So we tried to mix that up and have a good mixture, and we would certainly welcome any topics that you had in mind. So be very specific if you know, or if you're willing to volunteer. If you have a skill you'd like to share with the membership, please contact Chris Shaw or myself, Walt Oldeck, and we'll get you started in that. So, thanks. Mark, quite a few questions coming in about when we had the asterisk on that chart, what it means on the retention and submission requirements. Can you elaborate on what the asterisk meant?
I'm sorry, what was the last sentence you said?
You had on the one chart back in the presentation where you had an asterisk on the one chart where it said some have to have retention, some submission, and then you had some asterisks. Got about 3 questions coming in about the asterisk. What does that mean?
Okay.
For
the asterisk just 1 second here. The interpretation from the PPAP 4th edition is that the organization, that would be the company that's going to manufacture the product, shall retain these documents at appropriate locations and submit them to the customer upon request. So it may be held by the company, it may be held by their customers in addition to that.
Okay. Great. Got a question from Craig asking if the automotive section would share their experience with the Detroit section. Absolute, Craig. Kush Shaw is a member, and I am myself a member of the Detroit section. So Kush is quite active, and we communicate with Elizabeth Hanna quite often. So please get with Kush, and we'd be more than happy to share that. Got some suggestions coming in here for speakers. How many people attended this webinar? We officially had 189 online, and I know of a couple groups that had people in a conference room, so we're probably around the 200 mark. Are the ASQ web training, does that meet the OEM requirement?
I don't have a firm answer for you on that.
Okay.
Right now, the materials are still in the process of being developed, so my guess is that they don't today but will tomorrow, and I don't know when tomorrow occurs.
Here's a question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this ISO spec. Is ISO 17025 required for laboratories as a result of 2.2.12, qualified laboratory documentation?
I believe that's one of the ways that you can meet that requirement. The other is A2LA, but I don't have detailed knowledge in that particular area.
Under what circumstances a new PPAP is required?
Those are some of the slides that are included in the course notes of the course, but aren't addressed in this short 1-hour session. They are described in Section 3 of the both Section 1 and Section 3 of the PPAP manual. It says that in Section 1 that the organization shall obtain approval of their PPAP for a new part or product, for a correction of a discrepancy on a previously submitted part, for a product modified by an engineering change to the design record, specifications, or materials, or any situation that's required by Section 3, and Section 3 goes into other specific examples.
Thanks, Mark. What is the most common failure or mistake people make when submitting a PPAP?
Waiting till the last minute when there are all of these pressures to do things about the product, but nobody's paid attention to the documentation. If you're taking care of your documentation all the way along the road, all of the things that are expected, then it's merely a matter of compiling that information.
Okay.
So I'd say leaving things till the last minute.
What it's about? This is Kush. It's about 8:30. I want to be mindful of people's time, so really want to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and we hope that you become part of the ASQ Automotive member, and also start volunteering for us. So we really look forward for that. And I want to thank Walt for hosting this great webinar.
Okay, thanks, Kush. And thanks, Mark, for presenting.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, this will conclude our webinar, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. The next one is in November, so please look on our website, asq-auto.org, and please sign up, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, and have a good night.